Hey everyone, if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, hello. My name is Urvi, I live in New York City, and I make a variety of different videos, so feel free to go look around on my channel and stick around if you like it. And in today's video, I'm gonna review all of the books that I read in 2020 and categorize them into the books that I loved reading, the books that I didn't mind reading and were okay reads, and then the books that I did not like reading. So this should be a great video if you're looking for some book recommendations, or if any of the books on my list are the books that you've been wanting to read. One of my resolutions for 2020 was to read at least 12 books, one book every month. And so I want to say that this list of my 2020 reads is going to be fiction heavy, just because I feel like I love fiction, and I feel like stories and thrillers and psychological thrillers and all of that, it gets me turning the pages quickly, it gets me like super interested, so I don't want to stop reading, and I really needed that to happen because I had stopped reading for a little bit. I will leave the timestamps below and you can easily skip through the books that may not be your favorite genres or may not be your favorite titles or authors or whatever. And I want to start off with the books that I didn't really like so much, just so we can get that out of the way before I get into the books that I didn't mind and the books that I really liked. So let's get started. The first book I read this year that I didn't really like was Girl Wash Your Face by Rachel Hollis. This is a self-help book basically, and every chapter in this book starts with a lie that the author told herself, a mental limitation, and her experiences and her life and how she got over it and got herself to just be successful and be determined and stuff like that. I had high hopes for this book, and I thought starting the year with a book like this was gonna be good because it would push me to do better and to stop making excuses. But honestly, I was disappointed. I found that the author's perspective was kind of privileged, and this book was a little bit self-centered and tone-deaf. There were also a few problematic areas in this book when she talks about diet culture in a certain way, when she talks about marrying the guy that initially she was dating and he was a complete jerk to her and he would ignore her. And so I feel like those were some of the problematic areas for me that I did not really agree with. A lot of the problems that she describes in this book kind of seemed made up to me, like something she just made up for herself that really weren't problems at all. But since this is her life story, I don't want to take it apart or comment badly about it. I just feel like it didn't really speak to me. It felt like a cliche in some parts. There was a lot of fluff that I really don't like in self-help books, and that's why I don't read a lot of them, because I feel like a lot of them are repetitive and say the same things. And if you want that push and someone to tell you that you can do anything, this could be a good little book for you. But if not, I would say skip it. The next book that I was not a fan of was Unspeakable Things by Jess Lourey. Now, this is a book that is based on true incidents from the author's hometown. This book is based in 1980s Minnesota, and it talks about this very dysfunctional, poor family that lives in the suburbs of Minnesota and all of the bad things that are happening in their town. Overall, I felt like this book was overly descriptive about Minnesota, about where the girls lived, about their families. About 2/3 of the book was just like descriptions instead of like a story or like an interesting story where you kind of get involved and, you know, feel like you're the character in the story. But at least for me, when I read a good book, I feel like if I can relate to the character, I start feeling like I'm in the story, which was lacking for me here. The ending was kind of predictable. I knew all along what was going to happen or who was going to be responsible for the bad things that were happening. Without giving away too much, I don't want to give away the story itself. But if you do enjoy like very descriptive, very detailed like accounts of the places, of the people, their personality, then you probably enjoy this book and should read it. But again, it wasn't for me. The next book I want to talk about is If You Tell by Gregg Olsen. This is a biography, true crime kind of book, and it's a story about three sisters and how their mom was extremely abusive and how, you know, their whole family was kind of again dysfunctional, and there's murders and there's secrets and there is the unbreakable bond between the three sisters. I feel like this had a chance to be a great story, a great novel, but I felt again like it was overly repetitive because 250 pages into the book, I was still waiting to kind of not read anymore about their mom's abusive punishments, her reckless behavior, her sadistic punishments that she used to give the girls and stuff like that, and for the story to kind of progress and become something good. But I kept turning page after page after page, and it would just be like a whole 20 pages about how their mom punished this girl and what she did. And in the first 100 pages I was like, okay, I get it, what next? It kept talking about this cult-like behavior in the family, and I kept wondering why the girls never did anything, and just kept speaking about it over and over, and the same things keep happening over and over again and still nothing changes. The ending was also kind of a letdown because I felt like this book could have at least ended in a more impactful, more thrilling way where Shelley pays for her crimes or something like that, but it was kind of a letdown, and I don't want to say any more. But if you do like true crime, you might enjoy this, but be prepared to read a lot in detail about kind of disturbing, abusive relationship between this mother and her family. And the last book that I want to include in my didn't like category is by Whitney Scharer. Now this book is supposed to be a historical fiction about the life of Lee Miller, who was a Vogue model turned into a photographer, and her life in Paris, falling in love with Man Ray, the famous photographer, and then her life covering the war in Germany as a journalist. Half of this novel to me felt like a historical romance novel because there was so much about Lee Miller and Man Ray's relationship, more than I cared to know about. And again, I felt like I could not relate to Lee Miller as much as I would have liked to. What I do like about this book is she talks about the passion she had for photography, the frustration of her, you know, being only seen as a model because of the beautiful face, the beautiful body that she had, and how much she struggled to get people to take her seriously as a photographer, including Man Ray, the man she loved and lived with in Paris. So I do love the feminist side of this novel, and for that reason I would suggest you read it. I didn't think this was truly historical fiction because there was a lot of romance. I also did not enjoy that the book kind of kept jumping between her current life today, her life in Paris, and her life as a journalist covering the war. I just felt like I was sometimes confused about what period I was reading about because it was all like kind of back and forth, and so I didn't enjoy that. But if you like that style of writing, you probably will enjoy this book. Moving on to the books that I actually didn't mind reading and I would say were pretty good reads, and the first book there I want to talk about is More Than Words by Jill Santopolo, and it is contemporary romance, self-discovery kind of novel. This is a story about Nina, who is the daughter of a rich hotelier in New York City. Now right off the bat, I honestly have a soft spot for any book that is based in New York City because I feel like I can relate so much to it because I know where this was happening, or I can imagine, okay, this street, so I can imagine exactly what street that was on or what that time would have looked like and stuff like that. Now back to Nina. Her whole life she has been taught to be this well-behaved rich kid who is very proper, destined to take on her dad's business once he passes, and how she is to choose between the guys that she is in love with and is all set to get married to, and another person that enters the scene who she is attracted to and is a lot more curious about and compatible with. This was a good read, but it wasn't amazing. Some things that I didn't like is that this book could have portrayed Nina as a stronger character who was on this path to self-discovery, which I think it was set up to do. And again, this wasn't a bad read, but I wasn't a huge fan. Okay, so the next book is You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero, and it definitely falls in the self-help realm. The reason that I liked this book was that Jen Sincero as an author is hilarious, and this book is written in a way that you feel like you're reading or listening to a friend. And just the whole way the book is written, it feels very natural to me. It was entertaining, but if I'm looking at it from the self-help angle, I felt like a lot of this book, again, unfortunately, was fluff. It was the same philosophy as The Secret, because what she basically says in this book is if you want something, you can manifest it, and if you want something, you can go and get it. And if you're not manifesting it correctly, that's why you don't have something that you want, which I think is pretty much the whole idea behind the book The Secret. And The Secret, which is on my list for the books that I like, like says all of the things that are said in this book. So I feel like that angle of manifesting could have been left out of this book and instead filled with some out-of-the-box ideas to actually kind of better your life and not just fluff. It was a fun read, I would say. I was able to get through it and I didn't really mind it as much. The next book that I want to talk about, I'm sure you've heard of and heard being mentioned a million times, but it is this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and I finally got around to reading this in 2020. This book is basically like a textbook on how to be a more influential person, how to be someone that people are drawn to, how to make more friends, how to effectively communicate. There's some key ideas in this book that I actually really like when he says you have to listen to people and actually be interested in what they're saying instead of, you know, how we tend to go off about our own self and our own ideas and our stories. And he just talks about how we should be more of listeners than talkers if you want to attract people that respect you, that want to be around you. But there is also like parts of this book which were so repetitive, I just felt like, oh my god, am I never going to finish this book? In every sense of the word, it did feel like a textbook to me, like a course I was taking. I felt like some of the things mentioned in this book and some of the ways to attract people or build friendships were bordering on being manipulative and being a people pleaser or being like a agreeable person all the time. This book could be really useful in actually trying to be a more genuine, likable, influential person if you took it with a grain of salt. I know a lot of people who have recommended this book to me and have enjoyed it, so I definitely think you should read this book at least one time to see if there is something of value that you can take from it, because I certainly did. Last book in this category that I want to talk about is called Every Last Secret, and it is by A.R. Torre. This book is a psychological thriller fiction kind of book that I honestly really enjoy. Any psychological thriller in the form of movies or books, I find myself so interested and so drawn to like finishing it. And so for that reason, I feel like I may have been a little bit biased towards this book, but I did really like the storyline. This book is about a woman named Kat Winthorpe who is married to a rich guy, and he is a very successful businessman, and she has everything. She has money, she has social standing, much more than she would ever need. And then there's this other woman whose name is Nina Ryder. She is not as privileged. She's had to like work hard for everything in her life. She's really anxious to kind of move up on the social ladder and move up in the society, and so she tries to start an affair with Kat Winthorpe's husband, and then it just becomes a deceitful like web of lies, and then getting kind of fixated on Kat's husband. And I honestly enjoyed a lot of this story. The only reason I put it in my not so great books was because I read a similar book with a similar storyline earlier in the year. For Every Last Secret, there could have been a much more impactful ending, especially because it's a psychological thriller. I was turning the pages throughout the book because I was super excited to see how it ends and what happens, but it was kind of a letdown for me, and I don't want to give anything more away, so I won't say why. If you enjoy fiction and if you especially enjoy thrillers, then you definitely should pick up this book, because although the ending wasn't satisfactory for me, I really enjoyed the journey of reading this book. Now I want to move on to the books that I read in 2020 and absolutely loved, and if you haven't read these, you should definitely put them on your list for 2021 reads. The first one that I want to talk about is very similar to Every Last Secret, and it's probably one of my top 3 books that I read in 2020. It is The Last Mrs. Parrish by Liv Constantine. The story is about Amber, who is a not so rich, not so privileged girl who is kind of tired of being, you know, not so rich and middle class, and wants to move up in society, wants to be rich. And so she befriends Daphne, who is a socialite and a philanthropist and is pretty rich and has a very rich, successful businessman husband. Amber and Daphne soon become really close friends, but what Amber is trying to do is slowly take Daphne's life and become Daphne, who is Mrs. Parrish in the story, and Amber wants to be Mrs. Parrish. This is a story about seduction and lies and deceit and tricks. And why I love this book so much is because the ending was completely unexpected, complete shocker for me. It was honestly, just trust me, and if you enjoy fiction and psychological thrillers, pick this book up. The Last Mrs. Parrish, hands down one of the books that I could not put down, and I honestly finished reading this book like in 2 days. So read this one. The next book that I want to talk about is The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. Now this book was written in 2013, and that was probably a time when people were not as serious about their 20s and were kind of fickle about relationships, about jobs, and thought that it was a time to just have fun and not be that serious about life. And so Meg Jay is actually contradicting that and saying that that's the wrong way of thinking, and that your 20s are your most pivotal years. It's the most defining decade of your life where you can make the biggest changes, and if you make the right moves, then that sets the rest of your 30s and 40s and 50s into a successful like time in your life, as opposed to wasting your 20s and then kind of hustling in your 30s and 40s to get on top. In 2020, 20-somethings are definitely a lot more driven than they used to be, a lot more focused, a lot more career centric than they used to be. So you may feel like this book might not make as much sense, but I do think that this book made a lot of sense to me, especially because I'm in my late 20s versus my early 20s, where I was much more, raring to go, like I can do this, I have to be the best and more successful. I was very driven, and then after a couple of things happen in life, after you go through certain failed experiences, relationships and stuff like that, life kind of brings you down. And so for me, in my late 20s, this book has really spoken to me. My favorite, especially in the career part of this book, is when the author talks about having or building identity capital, which means that you actually are building experiences and building your personality by going through the experiences and the jobs and all of those career changes and all of that you go through. And the other idea that really spoke to me is the power of your weak ties, where the author says that it's not usually your strongest ties, your friends, your closest friends, your family who make the biggest change in your career, but it's more often or most often your weak ties. For example, people you network with, people you don't really know as well, people that you work with, your colleagues, who actually make the biggest and play the most pivotal role in your career, advancing your career, which I knew, but I never thought about it like that. And how she talks about how you should nurture those weak ties and how you should try to build more weak ties, how weak ties can actually help you diversify your way of thinking, change your perspective in a good way on certain things that you probably wouldn't have thought about otherwise, or with your strong ties, which I really like that idea, and that's something that really spoke to me. I would definitely recommend picking up this book, especially if you're in your mid to late 20s. The next book that I want to talk about is The Other Woman by Sandie Jones, and this book again falls in my favorite genre, psychological thriller, mystery fiction. And this book is a story about Emily, who meets this guy named Adam and thinks he's perfect, he's just charming and handsome, and he's just the perfect guy on paper. But when she meets his mom Pammy and his brother, she starts to find that there's something wrong, and that Pammy is very attached to her son and is trying to break the bond between her and Adam because she doesn't want any other woman to come close to her son. And so she's trying to play all these tricks so that she can break their relationship. This book surprised me with the ending. I was not expecting it. I'm pretty sure a lot of people didn't see it coming. Without saying much, I do want to say that this was again one of those addictive, fast-paced books that I felt like once I started, I did not want to put down. And so for that reason alone, I would definitely recommend this as one of your fiction picks for 2021. The next book that I want to talk about, and I know absolutely nobody is a stranger to this book, it is of course The Secret. And there was a period when I found myself reading this book every morning for 30 minutes, and it just like set me up for success, and it just set me up to have a really good day because it just changed my mind space and just helped make me feel really positive. This book was kind of magical for me, and I know that can sound a little cliche, but I do feel like for believers and for people that actually believe in manifesting and who believe in like the power of the universe and manifesting your reality and things like that, there is absolutely no better book than The Secret. I have read this book multiple times. I have watched the movie on Netflix, I think. I honestly every time learn something new or find something new that speaks to me every time I read this book. And what I enjoy about The Secret is also the little stories about people manifesting success, money, things that they wanted, or love, or relationships, or friendships. I just love reading the stories of real people and real experiences. So if you haven't read this book and you're interested in the power of manifesting, the science of it, and all of that, I definitely recommend make this one of your top 5 2021 recommendations. The last book on my list and my absolute #1 favorite read of 2020 has to be Park Avenue Summer by Renee Rosen. I love this book so much because I honestly felt like certain parts of it I could so relate to. This is a story about Alice Weiss, who in 1965 is from a Midwestern town and leaves her small town and comes to New York City to pursue her big like fashion dreams of becoming a photographer, and she ends up landing a job of a secretary at Cosmopolitan magazine. And Cosmopolitan magazine at that time is in a transitional phase, and they are bringing in this new editor-in-chief, Helen Gurley Brown, who this historical fiction story is actually inspired by. This book is so well written. You almost feel like you're Alice Weiss in New York City when you're reading this book, and for me that's the best way to read a book because it gets me so involved in the story. And being that I left my country, came to New York City to work in fashion, similar to Alice, I kind of felt like a lot of this was my story. And Helen Gurley's Cosmopolitan, when she took over the reins, she was given a lot of challenges because that was not the time when women were allowed to do a lot of things and be open about sexuality, about money, about being successful and all of that. And in that time, Helen Gurley was a very forward-thinking woman who brought this new feminist agenda to Cosmopolitan, and how Alice was a part of that. And Alice quickly learns that in Helen's world, a girl can demand whatever she wants and have it. It had the Devil Wears Prada vibes to it, and just a classic 1965 New York City based page turner. And I feel like women especially would definitely identify with it because of all of the feminist and strong female characters and female leads in this book, and how their stories are written and how their personalities are portrayed to you as a reader. And so I think this is my #1 recommendation for 2021. And with that, I have covered all of my 2020 reads. In 2021, I definitely want to read a lot more books and a lot more good self-help books than I read in 2020. So if you have any recommendations for fiction, psychological thrillers, true crime, mystery, and good, no fluff, realistic self-help books, then please leave them in the comments below. I will be very grateful. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It really helps my channel. Share it with any friend who loves reading books, and also subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching.